we're Better Business Bureau, West Michigan. Our whole purpose as a nonprofit is to promote trust. Accredited businesses support us, so we can do these education events. We can educate consumers and businesses alike about who are trustworthy, who may not be trustworthy, and try to guide consumers. That's our role. Trust Lab is an initiative that we actually developed here in West Michigan, where we're going to measure trust. We're doing studies with the Calvin Center for Social Research to measure trust in West Michigan in certain industries against the national averages done by Nielsen and other ratings. Once we have the data, we also want to provide ways to help companies improve their trust level. Because not only do your customers trust you and do your vendors trust you, do your employees trust you? Okay, it all starts there. So we have these programs in place that we'll be launching in the very near future. That is supported by our Trust Lab sponsors, and we have two of them here today. Varnum, who is the sponsor of this event. We're thrilled that Barbara's here representing Varnum. And Rich and Jenna are representing BHS Insurance, who was our newest Trust Lab sponsor. So that's why we're here, and we will have a series of these. We did one a little over a month ago on cybersecurity and security in general. We will have one coming up in June to talk about insurance, particularly health insurance for small businesses, and maybe some opportunities on how to help with that as well. Okay? So with that said, what I'd like to do is introduce the panelists. I'm going to start with Andrea Owens. Andrea is the owner of HourGlass Testing Solutions. They specialize in same-day on-site drug and alcohol testing for human resources, logistics, and safety managers in manufacturing and transportation industries. I'm reading verbatim, so if I say something wrong.
Okay.
She's over 30 years, she looks like she only has 10. 30 years of experience in the drug and alcohol industry testing, providing certified training and educational services for drug and alcohol collectors and employers regarding policies, compliance, and regulatory issues that affect productivity. HourGlass Testing was recently named a finalist for the top women-owned businesses by the Grand Rapids Business Journal. In addition to her role at HourGlass Testing, she's an adjunct faculty at Cornerstone University and a success navigator at West Michigan Center for Arts and Technology. Thank you and welcome, Andrea. Rich is the Director of Risk Management at BHS Insurance. He joined BHS team in 2005 and serves as the Director of Risk Management. His responsibilities include providing safety and loss control services to BHS clients, as well as assisting the claims department. Rich is a graduate of Western Michigan University with a BBA dual major in Operations Management and Industrial Marketing. He also has 2 masters, Business Management and International Focus, and Sustainable Business Management from Aquinas College. He has been in the environmental, health, and safety profession since 1998, including international experience. I'm going to let Rich get into it with some of his other things as well. Barbara is a labor and employment attorney with Varnum. Barbara is an attorney and focuses with the labor and employment team. She has experience in issues related to workplace policies, discrimination in the workplace, the ADA, FMLA, and state and federal wage hour matters. She also serves the Business and Corporate Services Practices team by providing assistance with mergers and acquisitions. We thought it might be interesting to have people from these particular segments of business because they can give kind of an overview of the different things you might want to consider. So I'm going to ask them to just give a couple of minutes on what you do, and then what we'll do is we'll actually open up the questions. We have what we believe will be a majority of the questions you ask, but we'd like to get your involvement. So perhaps, Andrea, if you could just do a quick recap of what you do in addition to what I said.
Well, I think you summed it up pretty well. Just going on site to employers and either testing or collecting the specimens to be tested for. Certified, many certifications in this arena. You have to be certified with collections and training, so I'm able to train individuals on how to collect the specimens and what to do when there's situations that are not a normal collection. A lot of our focus too is on the training and education. So with this whole legalization situation, the training has and education for employers has been a huge topic, and just trying to be able to help people understand it. How to train we also train the employers and their leads, so their team, their leaders that work directly with the employees. So training them on reasonable suspicion to kind of go hand in hand on what to see, what to look for, And that should roll right into their policies to help solidify those things so they can move forward with whatever actions they want to take or not take, depending on the employer, on what they want to take with the employees. So that's important. Right now, we're looking at that. And just wanting to partner with employers to help provide a safe workplace. That's what my goal is. That's what my passion is, to make sure of that. So whether it's helping you create a policy, revise a policy, I can also help with that. So just
Thank you. Rich?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here, and just want to let you know that Jack had mentioned that, and it was a typo, that I've been with BHS since 2005. It's actually 2015.
Okay.
So maybe I'm still a novice. So let me put a disclaimer out there. I don't have all the answers. Jenna does. I thought you were here to support me. Wow. Okay. So what I do for the clients, and I know sometimes people get mixed up with, you know, are you the carrier? Are you the agency? What does a carrier do versus the agency? I'm the agency, or I represent the agency. So I'm your advocate if you are my client. And so I'm always going to look after your best interest because you're my customer, if you will. Whereas a carrier is my customer. And they're more risk averse, let's say, because they're the ones that are going to pay the claims on any outstanding cases out there, whether it's for property, workers' comp cases, or general liability, what have you. And so my job is to go out and do consulting work with the clients in terms of what their exposures are. And every one of my clients, even in the same industry, will have different levels of risk. And so I don't always give them a one-size-fits-all. And it's very similar to what Andrea does. Based on the client, kind of look at what are they after, what are some of the exposures that they want to close down a bit on, that's tolerable, so they can live with that, and then design that policy around that, policy and procedures. We kind of do the same thing. I'll look at somebody in the automotive industry, and based on what they do, and another one might be a little different. As well as some of our clients are public gardens. As I was telling Rachel earlier, that we have over 75 public gardens and museums throughout the United States. And even though they might be, botanical gardens, again, different sizes, and the things that they expose themselves to with some of these roving exhibits puts an undue burden on their exposures, and so I'll try to help mitigate that when they start to do any type of maintenance with those things. As well as I'll also look at some of our clients are nonprofit organizations, and we have several throughout the state. Most of them are in the state, some are in neighboring states, but typically 80% of our businesses, correct me if I'm wrong, Jenna, that it's right here in Michigan, and then the other 20%, it's like the old 80-20 rule, it's throughout the United States. So we have a presence in all 48 states. I do some traveling to some of these clients, whether it's Brooklyn Botanical Gardens, or it's some manufacturing sister facility that they have in Tennessee, or in Kentucky, or in Louisiana, wherever the case may be. And we also have, besides some of the nonprofits, we also have construction. As I understand, we've got HVAC companies, and that was a new one for me to understand that, or to realize that you're putting your folks in a hazardous environment at times.
Absolutely.
I mean, wow, never thought about that.
Yeah.
A lot of my contractors are into the construction of new buildings, like for example, just across the street here, I can see it from here almost, Suburban Inn's just built that. So I would help them with their construction activities in terms of when they're doing the erections, as far as once they're in full operations, and I look at from a general industry OSHA standards and state standards. So I'm well versed with my OSHA state standard, and I do also work with other clients that deal with other state plan states and with federal OSHA.
Thank you. Barbara?
Hey everyone, I'm an associate at Varnum. So I summered at Varnum 2 summers ago when I joined the firm full-time this past fall. I'm in the labor and employment group. So what I do mostly, well, I've mainly been dealing with the Paid Medical Leave Act. I don't know if you guys have had to deal with that yet. I'm sorry if you have. If you're exempt, you're so lucky. So I've been mainly dealing with that, but when I came in as a associate, I've also been dealing a lot with the new medical marijuana, or the recreational marijuana law that came out. So I've been doing a lot of research into the drug testing laws, both state and federal. And I've also been looking into, I've been doing a lot of case research and, how are Michigan courts, how are federal courts, dealing with the interaction between state and federal law. So I can speak to that issue as well. But overall, the firm, we review a handbook policies, so I can, I've been reviewing a lot of policies for the Paid Medical Leave Act, so I've had a chance to review a lot of handbooks. I've gotten a chance to see, different employers' policies, so I can maybe give you a sense of what some of our clients are doing, how they're changing their policies. I can also talk, some of our clients do things such as drug testing themselves. Some clients, want to get on the ground floor of, being a licensed seller. So, kind of gotten a little taste of the different industries, where this is heading.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you. We're going to open up the questions, but the first one I'm going to ask is for Barbara and the rest of the panel. Where do the laws stand now as it relates to this? Okay, that might be a good starting point so everybody can get a general sense of how things stand at this point.
Right, yeah, absolutely. So first we have the medical marijuana law that came out a few years ago, which just, allowed for the process if someone has a disability and they have a certain, kind of disease, to obtain a card in order to have medical marijuana. That law, the MMA law, specifically doesn't, employers do not have to accommodate the use of marijuana in the workplace. So you cannot ingest, under that law you can't ingest, you can't come to work high. You cannot be under the influence of marijuana at work. And this fall we just passed the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, which basically just deregulates or decriminalizes marijuana. It does not legalize marijuana technically. And we can flesh that out more later, but so what that does, people can possess up to 2.5 ounces of marijuana. They can grow it at home, they can use it at home. You're allowed to gift marijuana, you're not allowed to sell it yet, and the act also allows for the licensing. So, there's a process in which counties can pass a law to allow licensing in their districts. I know some counties actually have voted against allowing licensing, and I think up north a couple of counties have already voted against it. But what it does, and from the employment side, employers are not required to allow employees to come to work high. They can't have employees can't have marijuana at the workplace. They can't, keep it in their car because technically your parking lot is part of your property. So employers do not have to allow this.
Okay. Anybody want to ask a question related to that?
Yeah, I heard it.
Okay, so back in the day, right? You suspect that there's some form of abuse going on, and you send someone for testing, depending on what the company policy was. But you send someone for testing. My understanding is THC stays in the system for a long time. So I send you to get tested, you come back dirty, and you say, I wasn't high at work, I smoked the night before, in my home where I can. And yet, I had reason to suspect that there was some impairment. Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, is there an impairment level or a test that might,
There's currently no test or method to check for under the influence, but there are options on how to test. So for instance, urine, right? Most people do urine tests. It's in the system. It's detectable 5 to 7 days of use. Oral swabs, it gives you a smaller window of detection, so you can detect from 5 hours of 5 hours of use all the way to 48 hours. So it's a smaller window, and then hair goes out even further. But to answer your question, all of that depends on how it depended on a person's policy. So if a person's policy specifically said, if we test and we find this, and that's what you utilized, then you are able to do that. There's reasonable suspicion training that an employer could have used in that particular case, where you observed that individual, over time, a couple days, however you wanted to do that. There's a process where you could observe that individual, and that would give you an opportunity to say, all right, based on our policy, and that I've observed your behavior, whatever it may be, whatever you felt that was a reasonable suspicion to test them, because
Right.
that's what it was. Then you would be more confident in sending them in for testing and going forward with that.
But again, the results of that test, you know, it can come out, yep, they use, and they're saying, but not when I'm working.
Yeah.
And so where do you know, like
Richard
we
Barber,
have.
do you have anything you could add to that?
Yeah, when it comes to that, and they test positive, you got to make sure that your signs and symptoms, and that's why
Yeah.
what Andrea was talking about, reasonable suspicion. I recommend to my clients, you got to take the class. It's what, 90 minutes to 2 hours?
2-hour class.
And once you have that and you got to document it, now you're looking for those signs and symptoms. I mean, for example, if somebody is limping one day and they weren't before, that typically wouldn't be a sign and symptom. It'd have to be like red eye, dilated pupils, speaking with a slur.
Yeah.
In other words, you know this employee, and for some reason, especially after an accident, post-accident, they're stumbling, and you've got witness statements that said, yeah, prior to him coming to work, I mean, he kind of seemed like he was off, and then he was doing some strange things, and yeah, he crashed into that rack with that forklift. You know, once you have those signs and symptoms, because now you've got first line leaders, I always recommend first line leaders and the HR manager to go ahead and take this suspicion training so they know what to look for, and then say, hey, look, you know, we have reasonable suspicion that the contributory factor for this incident was a direct result of your behavior that we observed, and so we're going to take you in for drug testing, for a drug screen. And you would probably, you'd be in pretty good shape in that regard. Because regardless of whether it's medicinal use or for recreational use, if you got a policy that says we will not have people in possession of it, we will not have people consuming it, we will not have people at lunch hour taking it, we will not have people on our property, including when they're in their car in our parking lot, to engage in these activities, then that's it. If they violate that, then then use your
So
disciplinary
you can
procedure.
still have in your handbooks, regardless of what laws are passed or not passed, this is our policy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Right.
But it has to be specific. It has to be specific
Right, you
in
need,
your
the
language.
law is that you have to follow your own policy.
Right.
And,
Okay.
we take the position that employers are still allowed to use a zero tolerance policy in their handbook. So if you have a zero tolerance policy, you don't need to change that
Okay.
just because
Right.
this law's been passed, and even, it's still prohibited under the Controlled Substance Act.
Yeah.
And technically, everyone's supposed to comply with state and federal law. Federal law has not been
Right.
preempted, so
Right.
it's still an illegal substance technically.
If they have a prescription, though, for medical.
Even if they have a medical prescription, it's
Okay.
still
Yeah.
prohibited under federal law.
Okay.
And I just want to, there's no, we don't have any case law yet, describing what under the influence means. Someone's impaired at work. We don't have that. In other states like Colorado, the state police have passed, if you're pulled over with like 0.04 something, I don't
Yeah.
understand.
0.04.
0.04, and you're, that's just an arbitrary, they just arbitrarily implemented that number.
Right.
So that, we're not gonna have a number like that for a while.
Yeah,
So I
it's
think,
gonna take some
what we're
time.
advising employers is if you wanna continue to use a zero tolerance policy, that's fine, and, an employee's not gonna have a claim against you for disciplining them, even if they smoked a few days before, that's okay. They're not gonna have a viable claim against you for, wrongful termination.
Okay.
Next question. I have a bunch if you don't have any, but if you do, fire away. No? Should there be different policies for different types of position within my workplace, especially for roles that involve using machinery or driving a vehicle?
The policy should be the same regardless. Now, there's going to be certain policies where it's safety sensitive, so it might be a little bit more strict in that regard. Safety sensitive really is determined upon the employer, and you could be challenged by it So make sure that you just don't say, well, everything's safety sensitive, because I could walk out right out of the lunchroom and get hit by a high-low or something like that. So it's got to be like, for example, power industrial trucks, which would include forklifts, aerial work platforms, boom lifts, that type of thing, as well as driving vehicles, company-owned vehicles, especially if you're driving CDLs or even chauffeurs. I mean, at that point, especially if you're interstate and you only have to do it once, I have some clients that, well, we spend 99% of our time right here, but once a year we go to Indiana. Well, guess what? You just tripped the U.S. DOT
You
regulations.
just hit the next question.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
And
would
so-
be cross state lines, right?
Yeah.
And so at that
Absolutely.
point, you know, it's gonna be a zero tolerance at that point. And it should be for any company that has people driving vehicles, because you can declare those safety sensitive, because you're putting yourself at risk as well as the general public for that matter.
One of this came in from somebody through Facebook. We all are having a challenging hiring and keeping employees now in this time, right? And so there was concern that if I have a more restrictive drug policy, is it really worth it in terms of keeping and retaining good employees? It seems counterintuitive, but you know, obviously, I know we've all struggled. I'm assuming we've all struggled with staffing and keeping good folks. If we maintain a company no drug policy, I'm concerned it will impact my talent retention and recruitment in the future. Is that something you guys would be concerned about? Is it legitimate? No? Yes? So I guess the question is you address that via what you say in your policy then, correct?
Yeah, you always have to balance safety with what's the cost of the business. I have some clients that will not do, they might have a drug panel, but they're not going to have the THC listed on there. And I said, really? They said, well, if we did that, we wouldn't be able to hire anybody. And I bet you donuts to apples, every one of us in this room probably frequent some of those employers that I have. I'm not going to name their names, you know, but you know, it's a reality that we live in. The economy is very robust, it's very good, and I get where they're coming at. When I was working at some of the automotive manufacturers, we would hire, we had openings for 10 people, 12 people. We'd hire 50 at a time because we knew they couldn't pass their drug test, a certain percentage, about half of them. And then the other half, or the other 40%, 30%, couldn't make their first 2 weeks, no shows and that type of thing. And, you know, I hate to say it, but I remember growing up, that wasn't the case. Maybe it was, it just wasn't publicized.
It's going to impact many. I know I have a connection to the health education world, and nurses have to be tested before they go in clinical, and it's a huge issue. They fail. They can't. If they fail the test, they can't go in for clinical, which means they can't get their hours, which means they can't become a nurse. I don't have an issue with that, frankly, as a potential patient, but that's an interesting issue. Let's see. Do you have suggestions in terms to how to address and explain the drug policy in regards to new laws to my employees?
Well, I could answer that one too. You know, earlier we talked about zero tolerance. That's accepted. I try to discourage my clients from going to a zero policy. Zero policy sounds good. It sounds simple, quick, fast, affordable. But a lot of times, especially in this tight labor market, you end up either firing the person that you really want to keep because they've got tenure, they have 10, 20 years service, and they show up with a little bit of THC, and all of a sudden, cripe, we didn't know he had THC. He didn't act like he did. He didn't have the signs and symptoms. We just have a policy where we just automatic drug test after a post-incident. And the reality is, especially in the construction trades that I've noticed, people will turn a blind eye because superintendent's not going to fire their top foreman. Yet, they'll go ahead and fire somebody that just been there for maybe 3 months because this guy was just very marginal anyway, and now's the time to get rid of him because, see, he tested positive. Now we're not being consistent with our policies and procedures. Now you're very vulnerable, and you could get slapped with an EEOC fine.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
so
That
so that's a
actually
danger.
led to a question, which
Yeah.
how do we mitigate any issues with employee backlash if we terminate or don't hire someone because of marijuana use? Can I legally do that?
Yeah, so something I was going to say, what we've been recommending, if you don't want to do a zero tolerance policy, then one, you could stop testing pre-employment, because I think that helps with the tight labor market. And two is you can just reserve the right to test, so that, consistently you're reserving the right. So say you're not going to test for marijuana unless there's a workplace incident, in which case we reserve the right to test. And, in which case you might not test your superstar employee, but you might test the new employee that's only been there for 3-4 months. And, we've been advising clients that that's okay.
Okay. How are workman's comp claims handled for employees who are medical marijuana users? That was a question that came through. Is that something you've seen yet?
I haven't seen that yet, but from what I understand, if it's been attributable to marijuana usage, then you can say, it's not non-compensable.
Yeah.
However, if they do show that they have it in their bloodstream and they're not exhibiting any signs or symptoms, like for example, let's say that you just have a drug policy post-testing for somebody with a bee sting, because I've got people in landscaping, groundskeeping, and sometimes they don't know they're allergic to certain insects till they get bit by one. Next thing you know, they're swelling up and they're going to the emergency department. They get a drug test and all of a sudden, wow, it shows up you've got THC in your bloodstream. We're going to have to let your boss know, and then what happens, right? Kind of thing. So, it was the marijuana attributable to him getting that bee sting or her to that bee sting? Probably not.
No.
So at that point, it'll probably still be a workers' comp. They'll see it, and in other cases, if it's a major contributing factor, then they can deny it. For those that are in the HR departments and trying to make that determination, I would allow your workers' comp carrier make that decision. But again, due diligence states that you need to do a thorough investigation for your own protection. So find out what led up, what was this person doing prior to the incident, and what caused the unplanned event. Get the root cause analysis, as I say. Get witnesses. They don't have to be eyewitnesses. Eyewitnesses are always kind of nice and handy, but that's not always the case. Somebody first on scene could be viewed as a witness. Get those statements and submit that information to your workers' comp carrier or to your agency, and then we'll work with the carrier and say, hey, here's what we got. I like to put in for a denial, and I think I need you guys to do that for us, kind of thing.
Okay. Rich touched on this a little bit, but Andrea, maybe you could talk. We say if you suspect, right, that there might be an issue, you might want to do testing. Can you give kind of some of the high-level telltale signs that you might want to take a look at someone for exhibiting usage?
So more or less behavioral, their productivity, their, he touched on some of that, the bloodshot eyes, the slurred speech, the staggering gait, if you will. A lot of
increased appetite.
you have a potluck. You have a potluck, and they're eating everything at the potluck. But
I've known cases where people would actually eat a whole bag of Doritos.
Yeah.
Doritos, family style. I'm not
So
saying
you put
who.
Doritos out? Is that-
not saying who. A lot of people. A lot of people try to mask the smell of the marijuana.
Right.
The Doritos?
Yeah, the Doritos. That's something that's key as well. Especially now since people, with it being legalized, and there's really not a lot of people think, and even in my neck of the woods, talking to people, they feel that they can do it anywhere, anytime. I mean, driving, I can, wherever, they can do it anywhere. I went to lunch, so I drove off and I came back and they come in and there's, so just the smell of it, that's probably the first thing that you would notice, or the masking of it. And the potency of it is so strong now that it's really hard to mask the smell of that.
Even in a vape, I mean, I assume you can get it In a vape?
Right,
Yes,
or
you can.
ingestible,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
there's lots of different ways that.
Right.
Yeah, there's different
With
ways,
the
yeah.
ingestibles, you're not gonna
You can't
smell
smell that.
anything.
You won't smell it, but you'll still, with the edibles, you're still gonna have there's still the same potency of the, as if they were to have smoked it. And so you're gonna look for that, you know, their behavior, their appearance. Those are some of the things that you're gonna be able to tell.
It might take a little bit longer than smoking it, because that's.
Right, 'cause
goes
it's
right
ingestible.
direct into your
Right.
body, whereas
Mhm.
digesting it takes a little bit more time.
Right. So it's gonna take.
But they'll
time
have the
for
same
that.
signs and symptoms for
Absolutely.
that particular person.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So is pretty, do you see the medical portion of it being obsolete after once all this goes through its channels over the past?
So I'm going to repeat the question for the mic. Josh was wondering, will the medical portion of this be obsolete after recreation takes
After a
over?
couple, yeah, all these that are established growing, I mean, that's just a question I have.
I don't,
Is there gonna be use for that?
I think there will be, maybe in the employment context, there's actually been a lot of movement outside of Michigan. Some states, there's been some case decisions saying that, you know, the employer illegally discriminated against their employee for having a medical marijuana card and, you know, coming to work under the, you know, maybe not under the influence, but
Right.
having it in their system.
Right.
Michigan, we haven't had a decision like that. But the Michigan Persons with Disability Act hasn't been interpreted in conjunction with the Michigan Medical Marijuana Act, so it's something we're watching really closely. But it's possible
Yeah.
that, unlike the recreational law, which, you know, explicitly employers don't have to allow employees to come under the influence of marijuana, it's possible that in Michigan there could be a state law decision which allows an employee to, you know, for a reasonable accommodation of their disability, to come to work with marijuana in their system. So that's why that act is still
Right.
important.
But as of now, that's not the
Right.
case.
Right, as of now,
Right.
that's not
It's
the
not the
law.
case,
So
yeah.
we don't have any cases pending or anything like that interpreting. So.
And I think part of the reason is, you know, with people growing this stuff, you know, you don't know what the potency is, you don't know what the chemical ingredients are, the
Absolutely.
percentages. And for example, you can get Acapulco Gold or Columbia Gold, whatever, and go to the same vendor 6 months later, and it'll be entirely different once you take to a lab analysis. And a lot of these
Absolutely.
growers can't afford to do that. They're not going to take it to an analysis. They're not going to get it where there's a body of evidence where it shows here's the chain of custody of what's in the goods and that type of thing. So the FDA is very reluctant to say that, hey, yeah, we recognize this, and therefore now workers' comp's going to have to recognize it as a treatment. So with the exception, I think, of the one that came out of Great Britain, where it deals with folks that suffer through seizures with epilepsy. They
Right.
take that Epidiolex, and you know, I don't see very many people even taking that, because that's what, about $3,200? No, yeah, $32,000 a year for that. So that's very expensive. There's been talk about some of the medical marijuana in terms of where it just has a CBD rather than the THC. And even some of those that have that still have THC in them. But if they don't have any THC, then anybody could smoke that or ingest that,
Yeah.
and it won't show up on a drug test at all. So that's something to think about. Now, the nice thing about it, if you can call it nice, you're not going to have the psychoactive symptoms either that THC displays. I can speak from experience. My wife was in a near fatal accident. Now, I've been married 27 years, right? And she's when I married her, she was a goody two shoe. Maybe I influenced her after all these years. She didn't swear, she didn't smoke, never smoked a cigarette in her life. She was almost naive, kind of sheltered. And you know, when she had that near fatal accident, my kids decided that, I got adult children, said, Mom, you got to take this. It's an oil, it'll be good for you, it's CBD, you won't. She hesitated, and she couldn't sleep at night. The pain was just excruciating, and she didn't want to take Oxycontin or any of these
Yeah.
opioids
Opiates.
and that type of thing because of the addictive
Yeah.
traits of these things. And after she had taken it, you know, she was a little skeptical. She said, "Don't tell anybody," you know. And one of my sons, he's going to graduate with a sales marketing degree, and he could sell anything. So he sold her on the idea, and she took it for a week straight. And after that, she was able to sleep, she was able to rest, and after that, she didn't take it anymore. She says, I don't need it anymore. You know, and I didn't see her high and getting all flippant and stuff like this, and other than the fact that she said, you corrupted me. And I said, yeah, I took full credit. Now I can sleep with you at night. You're not a bear to waking me up because you're in pain all the time. But she was pretty badly off. Her body was bruised from neck all the way down to her legs. So as long as she wore full clothing, and it was right after Christmas, you know, so she's wearing thick clothing when she'd go out. Nobody knew that she was in pain and suffering other than she had a slow walk to herself, and that was about it.
So just
But I'm not saying that you should do this. It's still illegal because it's still considered a category 1. There are 5 categories. They're all controlled substances. The only thing is 2 through 5 requires a prescription, whereas category 1 is just totally illegal.
Right.
But I know there's talk about, and I don't know if it's passed yet, with House Bill 5445 stating that at least the CBD, they want to turn that into a category 5. I don't know if that's passed yet.
I don't think it's bad.
this hasn't
The
passed.
food companies are obviously exploring getting ready for that. I mean, even beers are now looking at having it in part of drafts
Yeah.
at this point. So,
The FDA has not approved it, so therefore it's considered illegal at this point. CBD oil, just piggybacking off of what he said, where you said that it could become a positive result. It depends on the percentage of the THC that's manufactured into the CBD oil. So if it contains less than a 0.3% THC, it should be negative. Anything above that would be considered a positive with the CBD oil. And there's no controls right now. There's 0 controls on how it's manufactured. So that's where that comes into play on how on the results. So I've had some employers that have asked me about that. You know, I've had some employees that are talking about CBD and that it's considered, you know, we can do it and it's not going to become positive. That is true. However, depending on how it's manufactured, then it can be. So that's another thing that you may hear as you move, just some things that you may hear moving down the road.
And I'm going to go out on a limb a little bit here in that, for example, you take any of these NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs like Tylenol perhaps or ibuprofen. Those are over the counter and those are legal. You don't even need a prescription yet. I dare anyone just to go out and say, you know what, I'm in the craft brews, but I'm also in the craft NSAIDs, and I'll start making them. The law would preclude you from being able to do that without getting certifications and going through a licensing procedures and the whole 9 yards and meeting all these protocols and standards and whatnot. So, you know, as I see these dispensaries that want to start coming up with their own marijuana formulations for CBDs, I see that being controlled to the point where your everyday Joe Blow down the street won't be able to do that, and of course the price of that now is going to go up. I would see that, but you got to have some kind of standards, right? You just can't just make this stuff up and then just distribute it. I don't think, but like I said, I'm just stepping out on a limb here, and that's where I see it going.
Yeah.
any other questions? I have one more that was on the list. Have you seen a difference in either the coverage or pricing as it relates to workers' comp, either mandating or requiring marijuana testing? They wanted to know, if I don't test for marijuana, will my worker comp carrier terminate our policy?
You know, I haven't seen that yet,
Okay.
but I would guess, just like anything else, you could have a fleet of 150 vehicles, like, for example, your electrical contractor, and your rates, if your modification rate is where it needs to be for your industry average, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, well, your rates are going to be based on that. But as soon as you start having claims,
Yep.
and they get to be repeat claims, then they might say, well, we're not going to renew with you, or we're going to really jack it up where you're not going to want us anyway.
Right.
You know, because every carrier is going to be different
Yeah.
in terms of how much risk they want to take based on their own portfolios. So
Okay.
it's,
Yeah, I also thought that certain industries had to have drug testing policies in place, like transportation related industries.
oh yeah,
Like,
Oh,
those,
that's
yeah,
mandated.
right,
I'm
mandated.
assuming that an insurer would also require
Yeah.
those industries
Mhm.
Should be covered, okay.
Be mandated.
I mean, you guys have, Chasma and Josh, you have drivers, right, that are out there driving around. This is an issue for you, right? What other questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Andrea, so for small to medium-sized companies, if they're looking at hiring a testing company, what are some questions that they maybe should ask or things that they should look for when finding a testing company, or kind of what are their options?
The
Or they
questions.
just hire you?
Oh, just to hire me to do it?
Yeah, just start with that, but if you're not available.
If I'm not available, you just want to make sure that you want to have people that are certified in what they're doing, that they have a network of locations to do the testing for you. If it's out of the area, you'd want that. And you'd also want somebody who's well versed, not having all the answers. No one has all the answers, but just being well versed in what the regulations are, as how they relate to your to your company. You have to look at companies uniquely. Everybody has a unique situation. Just talking with you from your organization. And what she said about how your people are going in and they're walking into a puff of smoke. So you have something that's a little unique, other than someone who's a manufacturer or who's in transportation, in the transportation industry. So you just want to make sure that whoever you're working with is knowledgeable in those things and that are willing to work with you one-on-one to customize whatever whatever you need. You don't want somebody just come in and throw their toolbox on the table and say, hey, this is what I've got for you. You want to make sure that somebody's going to listen to you and become a partner with you and work to make sure that you have safety, because that's the number one, right? I think that's the reason we're all here, to make sure that we maintain safety in the workplace. So, yeah.
And the other thing that you want to make sure too is any lab that you use for drug testing,
Yeah.
and I'm sure you have that is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Service Agency, which is a subset of the Department of Health and Human Services,
SAMHSA.
where they're going to meet the protocols
Yep.
of the chain of custody, how to test, when to test,
Yeah.
and all those other things.
Yeah.
And so therefore, if it ever comes to a situation where a former employee is filing a wrongful discrimination suit or wrongful termination, now you've got some strength behind this. Yes, we use this, they're certified, there's no question about it, and so on and so forth.
And that those tests are reviewed by a medical review officer, somebody who can look at those results to come up with the final resulting in that. So it's like the whole process and the testing.
And the MRO is going to have significant weight on that evaluation.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, that answer your question? Does anyone have any other questions?
Something that was talked about earlier when, we was recommended not to have necessarily a zero tolerance. And I could see that in our business, that would be, okay, reserve the right to test. Now, if an injury happens at work, and if we send the employee to med station or wherever, will it be required, not necessarily by us, but either by workman's comp or whatever, that they get tested? Or can you deny that? Or, you know what I mean? If there's suspicion, it's like, okay, you know what, I really don't want to lose Sandy, but not sure, but go get your finger fixed, but don't test her.
I would stay away from that. I would test.
You would test.
Because you know better at this point.
Correct,
This
correct.
person displayed the signs and symptoms.
Well, no, she didn't.
Oh, she
No,
didn't?
She didn't.
Oh.
But she got injured at work, needs stitches.
Right, so they're
Mhm.
gonna.
So now they're
force
gonna
something.
ask, did it happen at work? Yes, it did. And then are they gonna be required to take tests?
Mm,
For
the
workman's comp.
carrier might highly recommend it, because they
Okay.
always recommend, if it's an injury, report it. And a lot of times.
But can
it's-
we then, as the employer, say, no, I don't want them tested for drug
You
use,
could.
I just want
You
them
you have that
fixed."
choice.
You have that choice because you're not a mandated employer. You're not, if you were in the trucking industry or the DOT, it's mandated, but
Or FAA.
Or FAA, or
Right.
anything under the DOT umbrella, you would be mandated to do that, but in.
Commercial transportation.
Commercial, yeah, yeah. So
But
you
workman's
would-
comp might deny the claim then or something too then, no?
They could.
Does it
They
depend
could,
on your
but-
written
but-
policy?
But, yeah,
Yeah, it depends
Yeah,
on
you're
what
just-
you
It
have
depends on
written.
your written
you're gonna have to
policy.
look at your policy.
Yeah.
Right.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think the clear thing, Ed, is this is still being determined, right? It's nothing that's really clear cut yet. But it sounds like policies are incredibly important. Write your policy, have them reviewed, make
Mhm.
sure you're sticking by those.
Yeah. In our situation, I mean, it's not written in stone yet, but, we talked about it as a management team and stuff, and it, even from the owner, we're kind of set a policy is we don't care what people do in their own time.
Correct.
Just don't come by and don't be using it on the property.
Right.
Mhm.
So with that in mind, saying that employees could be users and, chances are they're gonna test positive, then what do you do about that when there is a injury at work? We're not in a
Or
trucking.
driving, or,
Well, that's a little bit, well,
Right.
yeah, but, so I mean, it's a little bit tighter line.
But doesn't it go back to what they were suggesting about looking at exhibiting the symptoms at work, right?
Yeah, you gotta have reasonable cause.
Right.
Otherwise you're gonna trip up the OSHA regulation for underreporting, 29 CFR
Yeah.
1401, where it states that if you make it your procedure such that people are afraid to report,
Yeah.
then they're gonna hold you to that.
Right.
So I always tell my clients, you can have that zero policy, you could do this, you could do that, but whatever you do, make sure that it isn't perceived by my OSHA in this case, in the state of Michigan, that it's a retaliatory motive that you got behind it. Otherwise, they'll cite you for that.
Okay. Anything else, folks? Was it helpful? Yeah.
Are you more confused?
almost.
Is
All right, give it another
is
5
smokier
minutes.
or fire? But thank you, the panelists. We appreciate your coming in.